Welcome to, welcome to Never Again is Now, a podcast about anti-Semitism. I'm Evelyn Marcus, and in addition to being a psychologist, I'm featured in the documentary about anti-Semitism, Never Again is Now. I am a Dutch Jew and a daughter of Holocaust survivors. In 2006, I immigrated to the United States because of the rising anti-Semitism in Europe.
I am Phyllis Zimbler Miller, founder of the free nonfiction Holocaust theater project, thinedgethewedge.com. I grew up in a small Midwestern town. My grandparents had come at the turn of the century, the last century, from Latvia and Russia. And in 1970, only 25 years after the end of World War II, my husband and I were stationed with the US Army in Munich, Germany. A situation that changed our lives forever.
Our guest of today is Moshe Dann. Welcome, Moshe, on our show. Moshe Dann is a historian, writer, and journalist. He moved from the United States to Israel in the 1980s. He lives in Jerusalem. He's a research associate at the Israel Institute for Strategic Studies that promotes freedom and Zionism. He's a freelance columnist for the Jerusalem Post and writes in American Jewish magazines as well. Again, welcome, Moshe, on our show. We're thrilled to have you.
Thank you.
I get to ask the first question today. Living in Israel, do you experience anti-Semitism there?
Well, first of all, let me just no, in the way that you experience it in the States, but I don't like the word anti-Semitism because I think the word should really be Jew hatred, and Jew hatred is we experience it all the time here, practiced by our Arab, Palestinian, whatever you want to call them, fellow residents who attack Jews because they are Jews. So Jew hatred is something that we experience as well as you in the States and all over the world. I hope that answers your question.
Yes. Ellen?
2 weeks ago, in your article, Islamic Terrorism and the Age of the Holocaust in the Jerusalem Post, you made a bold statement. You argued that the goal of the Palestinian struggle is not primarily to establish a Palestinian state, but to destroy the Jewish state. Can you explain to us, please, why you think that, and why would the Palestinians want to destroy the Jewish state?
In the PLO covenant and in the Hamas charter, it's written that the goal of these organizations is to destroy Israel. It is not about making any compromises. And people have written a lot about why Islamic organizations are really limited by what people interpret as the Quran, which says that, or the interpreters say that all land that was once occupied by Muslims cannot be given to any other group of people. So the dominant opinion among Islamic leaders is that all of the area of what we call Eretz Israel or Palestine or whatever you want to call it belongs to Muslims. So there's really no compromise. There's no sense of, well, live and let live, and we'll take part of it and let's make peace. The idea is to destroy Israel. That's the goal. And they can do it with the help of the world, and especially now with Iran, which is about to get the weapons of mass destruction. This creates a tremendous problem because it can be easily, Iran can easily get these weapons to its proxy in Lebanon and Syria, Hezbollah. And not only to the Hamas in groups and Islamic jihadist groups in Gaza, which are supported by the Muslim Brotherhood, which is Cairo-based, but an international organization dedicated to destroying Israel. The discussions about peace and territorial compromise and these kinds of things are really a distraction. They have nothing to do with reality. All of the leaders, Arab leaders, Arafat and Abbas and Hamas, they have all made this very, very clear. The problem is that the international community does not want to accept it. They would rather think about a peace process and a two-state solution and other things, which are unrealistic, unfortunately.
Okay, so you're saying the Palestinian organizations that have that take the Quran seriously will reason soil that has been under Islamic rule cannot be under Jewish rule, and that's Israel. Israel was in the Turkish Ottoman Empire under Islamic rule, for instance. So it has to be liberated from Jewish rule, and that has nothing to do with compromises about territory. That's just the whole Jewish state has to be abolished. That's what you're basically saying.
That's what the Islamist movements preach.
Okay, and my next question is also about that. Western Europe has a substantial, Western Europe, where I'm from originally, has a substantial Muslim minority, and more than half of that population is Islamists, according to a survey by the Berlin Social Science Center. The Palestinian struggle against Israel spilled over into violence against the Jews in Europe in the past 2 decades. Do you think Islamism is a threat for Jews in America as well?
Yes, of course.
Can you explain, please?
Islamic movements in the United States have spread throughout the country, a lot of them on campuses. Groups like CARE and American, I think it's called American Muslims for Palestine. It used to be called Muslim Student Association. There are hundreds of campuses throughout the United States, in addition to many other Muslim Brotherhood sponsored organizations. And they are preaching a very unhumanitarian doctrine of Jew hatred and Israel hatred. And it fits with unfortunately, with a lot of non-Jews, Christians, who don't like Jews anyway, and would rather not have Jews around. So they join them in demonstrations, and it's getting worse. And the fact that the organizations that could and should bring this to our attention of the world, have unfortunately failed.
And which organizations should have brought that to our attention, you think?
Well, I think all the Jewish organizations,
Oh, okay.
I mention any of them specifically, that's been in the press. A few Jewish organizations have been criticized for their lack of response to this issue. They would rather make peace with the Arab community and have a nice, wonderful kumsitz together, and they don't want to confront the real issue, which is Islamic fundamentalism, and that is a problem. It's a problem in the political world. The current administration doesn't seem to be aware of that at all. And this has led to some really unfortunate problems all over the world, like Afghanistan. But it's also an issue in America where the communities can't seem to come together to protect their Jewish friends and parts of their community. In Michigan, for example, in Ann Arbor, where I once went to school at the University of Michigan, every Shabbat, a group of people, a few of them Muslims, but some of them just non-Jews from the community, demonstrate on behalf of Palestinians in front of the Beit Knesset, which is the Hillel house, Beit Hillel there. And surprisingly, when this issue was taken to the Supreme Court, because they're intimidating the people who go to the synagogue, go to shul there on Shabbat, the appeals court ruled in favor of the demonstrators. That's frightening.
Mhm,
It's absolutely frightening.
mhm, mhm.
I mean, it's an appeals court.
Right.
Now, maybe it will be taken to the Supreme Court. I don't know. But
Was the appeals court in Michigan?
Sorry.
Was the appeals court in Michigan, right?
Yeah, the appeals court of Michigan, of course.
Okay. So
Moshe, that what you're saying is that what I have seen in Europe, Islamists threatening Jews and assaulting Jews because of that they want to destroy the Jewish state. You say we see that now also on campus. The Muslim Brotherhood has several front organizations in the United States. We know that. That's the Council of American Islamic Relations, CARE, as you mentioned. It's the AMP, the American Muslims for Palestine, or the students for what is it, Justice in Palestine. And there is the Islamic Society of North America, and there are many others that we as the Jewish community in America do business with.
Right.
about, fighting racism and all that. But in the meantime, their agenda is to destroy us. Um, do you think that's only directed at Israel or also at the Jewish community in America?
Now they want to, I don't know if they want to kill people. I'm sure I mean, they don't want to get caught, at least, doing that. But what they want to do is intimidate Americans, and especially American Jews, not to respond to their efforts to destroy Israel. And they have organizations that really support them passively and actively. J Street, Peace Now, Americans for Peace Now, all of these organizations, If Not Now, and so on, which support the Palestinians, pro-Palestinian.
And the Jewish Voice for Peace?
Jewish Voice for Peace, yes, good. What they seem to not understand is that a Palestinian state run by the PLO, Hamas, or whoever is in charge is a strategic danger to Israel. It's not. Yeah, go ahead.
And therefore to the Jewish people. And this
That's right.
brings me to what I wanted to talk to you about. And it's that American Jews today, in my mind, seem to be like the German Jews in the early 30s, when they thought that they were protected and respected, and that they didn't need to worry because Hitler in that time, and in our time, this Islamic movement will pass and it will be fine. And so that's why Evelyn and I started this podcast, because we want to encourage people to speak up. So as an historian, I know you've told me that we shouldn't talk about the periods together, but I'm not talking about so much the specifics as the blinders that we American Jews seem to have.
The process is the same. First, you intimidate. First, you create a context of fear so that people are afraid. You identify them with yellow stars or whatever. I mean, this process of intimidation, threat, is going on all the time now in America. In what happened in Europe, and it's not to compare the two, but what happened in Europe was that the rulers of Germany, the Nazis, simply became the most powerful controlling element in the country, and gave these Jew-hating groups more and more power. And as I wrote in this last piece that I sent you, unfortunately, the Christian churches of Europe, the Vatican, including the Vatican, were enthusiastic supporters of the Nazis. So if the Nazis looked around and said, "Oh, what do our neighbors feel and think about what we're doing?" they would see an applause section. And that gave them the sense that this is perfectly acceptable, that we can tolerate Jew hatred and nobody will say anything. And they were right.
Evelyn, next question.
Yeah, and also, Moshe, we see that now again, right? In the United States, we see an acceptance of Jew hatred in the United States, where in human rights groups and etc. Jew hatred is not in the high sections of the list, it's very neglected and even committed in human rights organizations.
Having an organization like the World Council of Churches, I mean, it's not a fly-by-night organization. It's a big organization that controls a lot of people, a lot of things the way they think. This is a Jew-hating organization. What's going on? How do Christians reconcile this with Christian values and humanitarianism? How do people justify this anti-Jewish, anti-Israel phenomenon? I don't understand it.
Well, yeah, they in that thinking, the Palestinians are the victims and the Jews are the perpetrators, and that justifies it in their mind.
That Israel is a racist, apartheid state that commits ethnic genocide. I mean, it's just that anybody who is sane would nod and approve of that kind of characterization is just unbelievable. It's unbelievable. And it goes to unfortunately, to the highest levels of our community.
Yeah.
Not only in the political world, but in the religious world.
It's worrisome. I agree. What measures should the Jewish organizations and non-Jewish leadership take to stop the rising anti-Semitism in America?
It's a good question. These are all great questions. And I think the first thing to do is to understand what's going on. I don't think there's an understanding. At the recent New York Jewish Federation had a big conference recently, at which some Israeli politicians spoke, and they all said, "Oh, it's terrible, you know, the anti-Semitism is terrible, blah, 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 blah." But nobody understood why, especially among young Jews, they've turned their back on Israel. And the reason is they've turned their back on Judaism. The connection between Judaism and Eretz Israel is very intimate, and it's essential, it's basic. When people turn against their religion, or the religion they think of themselves as, it's the first step towards, it's a logical first step towards alienation from Israel. So one of the things that I think that is probably the most important thing is to help especially students, young people, young Jews in America, to reconnect with their Judaism. They're not as a biological phenomenon, but to appreciate our heritage and our history. We have, I think, a lot to offer in that, and unfortunately, many of our teachers, including some of our rabbis, don't understand that and don't teach a love of authentic Judaism and a love of Israel. They become unfortunately, very political. That's sad. I was recently had a confrontation with a Reform rabbi here who criticized Israel for occupying Palestinian territory and persecuting the Palestinians and so on and so on and so on. There's no basis for that. None. I mean, it's all a lie, but what can you do? What can you do? I think this is where the Jewish community needs to face the reality. And the reality is that there's a lot of bad thinking going around. And some of it we produce ourselves. We have people like Peter Beinart, who I simply don't understand how he can say what he says about Israel. It's an outrage. And yet he's invited to speak at some Orthodox Jewish congregations. I simply don't understand it.
Yeah, Peter Beinart is a academic who argues that Zionism is against Jewish values, basically.
Yeah, Zionism, he says Zionism is racism.
Yeah.
He's against the existence of a Jewish state.
Right.
Now, I mean, and he's only he's an example of the problem. How many other people like him in leadership organizations of Jewish organizations, in leadership of temples and synagogues and whatever, say the same thing. I mean, it's frightening.
Yes, that's one of the reasons for this podcast, is to try and get some of these people to wake up. And the expression now, to be woke, in this case, we Jews need to be woke about what we're allowing to happen to ourselves. So as we asked you for last thoughts, if you want to also include anything you think on the individual level, I'm going to use your word, we can do against the rising Jew hatred. So you had some suggestions you did tell me earlier, and if you wanted to say those again, I thought they were excellent. Yeah, ready to go?
Look, the question is good. It's a question that needs to be asked constantly. What can I do? Okay. The first, when I thought about this question, I think about it a lot. I mean, what can I do? So I try to write. But the first thing is, I think people need to ask, what does God expect of you? How can you be creative, productive, sensitive, inquisitive? The second thing I think people can do is not think of themselves alone. Gather a group of people, small group of people around with you who have these kinds of questions, and work together. As a group, you can have a greater influence. Stay informed, of course. That's very important. And you have to be careful of the media. Much of it is anti-Jewish, but Arutz Sheva and JNS and other media sources are good. I think it's also important to support organizations like Regavim, which tries to protect Jewish communities in Judea and Samaria and other and around, and Honenu, which provides legal aid to Jews who are attacked, so on. Our NGO Monitor is a very important organization run by Professor Jerry Steinberg. who there's a lot of information on his website, which you can easily access. And websites like the Palestinian Media Watch of Itamar Marcos is very good. America is still a democracy, and we have to defeat the people who are running for and are in Congress and running for Congress, who are anti-Israel and Jew haters, some of them. What can I say? It's a hard battle, but it's one that we cannot avoid.
That's a really excellent way to end. It's a
Thank
hard battle, but it's one that we cannot afford to not engage in. And with that, I thank you so much, Moshe Dan, for being part of this podcast. I thank our listeners. For those of you who have not watched yet, Evelyn in the documentary Never Again Is Now, please do so. It's very important information that connects with what we're talking about. You can go to joinneveragainisnow.com. If you're interested in information about my free Holocaust theater project, it's at thinedgeofthewedge.com. And whenever you can, and I'm going to use Moshe's word, without putting yourself in bodily harm, speak up against Jew hatred.
Wonderful.